In this video, we will be covering how strong is the Commodore Godzilla. Yes, really. To be specific, I'm referring to the original video game Godzilla from the 1980 unlicensed game Godzilla! Or just Godzilla with an exclamation point. While the game was originally released on 1980 on the Commodore PET or Commodore PET, a updated version you could say was later released in 1983 on the Commodore 64. Both games are practically identical. Of course, I will mostly be focusing on the Commodore 64 version, since in the Commodore PET or PET version, Godzilla is only represented by the letter G, whereas in the Commodore 64 version, he's actually depicted by a generic green dinosaur icon. And in this version, you can actually see him move during the game somewhat. So the basic premise of this game is that the Japanese military, basically, instead of demilitarizing after World War II, decided to go all in and became the most fortified military in the world because they literally have hundreds of thousands of troopers, dozens of armed planes, and dozens of armed ships, and even an atomic bomb. That's right, Japan in this game has their own atomic bomb, and they're not afraid to use it. You also have 10 missiles at your disposal to launch at Godzilla in this game, although I've noticed they seem to drastically vary in terms of damage, going from possibly doing as much as severe damage to possibly not even doing any damage. Not to mention, if you use it on land, you'll do a lot of damage to your own troops. The goal is to kill Godzilla before he takes out too many of your own population. I think approximately 20 million casualties will do it. Godzilla has an invisible health bar, and the only indication of how much damage you're dealing to him is based off the description of damage that is told to you every time you attack, ranging from little damage, to some damage, to great damage, to major damage, to severe damage, and then finally to grave damage. As far as I can tell, the only way to achieve grave damage is to hit him with the atomic bomb. Also, according to this description from a magazine where you, I guess, get the game from, apparently Godzilla can regenerate or recover health in some capacity. As it mentions, you have to wear him down with repetitive attacks. Godzilla also has a possibility of going on a rampage, where basically he gets a free turn where he gets to cause damage before you even have a chance to attack him. You also only have 10 missiles, and I swear, they seem to be less effective the more you use them. The amount of damage you do to Godzilla when not relying on the bomb or missiles seems dependent on how much of the specific resource you throw at Godzilla. For example, if you have one soldier attack Godzilla, it won't do anything. But if you have, say, 125,000 troopers all fire at Godzilla at the same time, it'll inflict major damage. The same holds true if you have dozens of aircraft fire at him as well, which is referred to as an air raid, which somehow doesn't do damage to your own troops. Also, apparently the Japanese military, while possessing dozens of armed fighter planes and dozens of ships, enough to possibly outnumber the entire rest of the world's navy combined, they don't seem to have any tanks, which is kind of weird. Another weird thing about the game is that when it comes to attacking Godzilla with naval ships, it does seem to also depend on how many troops you have on board each ship. Since I got one message when I tried to attack Godzilla with one ship and a few hundred troopers, and it said too few men, but another instance I only had like one ship, but like 1,000 men on board. I don't know how you fit that many people on one ship, and it let me attack anyway. So the troops, despite not being able to attack with them if you choose the attack with soldiers option, seem to somehow determine the strength of attacks you hit with the ships. Based off the sound effect that plays when you order troops to attack, they're attacking with what sounds like rapid-fire assault weapons, or possibly machine gun fire. While I didn't bother to research what the standard Japanese assault rifle would be at that point in time, especially since there shouldn't even be a Japanese military at this point, though I guess then again we don't even know when this game even takes place. Let's say for the sake of argument, these soldiers are using the classic AK-47 rifles. An AK-47 rifle can produce 2,050 joules of energy with its firepower. If we multiply that by, say, the 125,000 average troopers that you can have attack Godzilla if he ever comes ashore, we get roughly 256 million joules of energy, which, when converted into kilojoules and then from there converted into tons of TNT, we get 0.06 tons of TNT, which is roughly like wall to small building level. Similarly, if you have, say, at least a few dozen aircraft perform an attack run on Godzilla, that too will inflict major damage. Assuming that these would be the Saber jets that also appeared in the original Godzilla movie, then doing the math for all of that, they'd all be together roughly like wall to small building level potentially as well, which doesn't bode well for this Godzilla being damaged by wall to small building level attacks. Of course, we don't even know how big this Godzilla is, but I'd assume he's at least building level by sheer size alone. I also can't really find out exactly what kind of missiles this hypothetical Japanese military empire would have, but like I said before, the damage the missiles do is very inconsistent. Sometimes they don't even do any damage. Sometimes it's just better to have 100,000 troops fire on Godzilla rather than just use one silly missile. Of course, seeing as how this Godzilla can actually survive an atomic bomb, it does mostly kill him, but he is still alive, at least with a little bit of health left afterwards. And if we take into account the weakest atomic bombs that would have existed at this point, I'd say the most you could lowball this Godzilla is multi-city block level. Although, I'd say very likely, based off the massive blast radius that occurs on the map when you use the atomic bomb, it's probably at least your average town level bomb, possibly even up to city level bomb, if we're going by the Castle Bravo bomb, which would have been tested before this point in time. I played a few matches in this game, and here are the results I had. When trying to stack together the types of damage to Godzilla, here's what I came up with. In the first match, I used the atomic bomb and always achieved grave damage. Then I used one missile, which inflicted major damage, and then he was dead. However, in a later match, I would do the same exact thing, getting a grave damage indicator, then a major damage indicator, but Godzilla was still alive afterwards. So just because it tells you the description of the ranking of damage you did, doesn't mean it's an exact amount. The average naval warship is capable of achieving wall level to as high as building level, with all its natural guns firing at the same time. Based off the sound effect, I don't think it's using any nuclear weapons against Godzilla, so the most we could scale them to is likely small building to building level, which again, Godzilla is able to tank. So let me get this straight. 125,000 troopers can do more damage than, say, several warships firing at Godzilla at the same time. And even doing more damage than a freaking missile. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think this Godzilla is just a bit of a blast cannon. He usually takes damage from attacks which would be considered wall to small building level, but doesn't take attacks from warships that would be capable of producing theoretically more firepower than that. I wish I knew how to data mine this game so I could actually look in and confirm if Godzilla does actually recover health after each turn, but sadly I'm not smart enough to know how to do that. However, seeing as how even the original 1954 Godzilla was confirmed to be superior to the atomic bomb, I'm going to put him a little weaker than the original 54 Godzilla, and say scale him to multi-city block level and leave it at that. Like I said before, the logic in this game is kind of thrown out the window, and this Godzilla's power scaling's a little inconsistent, seeing as how rifle fire from like hundreds of thousands of troopers seem to do more damage than, say, an entire fleet of ships firing at him all at once. So let's just put him a tier or two below the original 54 Godzilla and leave it at that. While he is the weakest Godzilla we've talked about so far, he's not going to look that weak by comparison once we get to some later entries. I'm sorry if this Godzilla wasn't exactly, the most interesting to talk about, but he is the first video game Godzilla, so I thought he deserved an entry since we're going to be covering later video game Godzillas in this series. With that being said, join me next time as we talk about a Godzilla game that has way more interesting stuff going on in it than this one. The Godzilla Movie Monster game on the Commodore 64. See you all then.